So, right away, let's figure out what we need to explain. Question: does everybody understand why us two dudes showed up to your organization and are telling you about the Syrian war? Okay, let me briefly explain. Me and Anrey are two people who accidentally met in Syria. What's that? Thought I turned it on. Okay, well, I guess I'm dumb then. Says it's recording. I am a soldier who accidentally became a journalist. Andrei is a journalist who accidentally became a soldier. And we met in Syria in the beginning of 2013, where I spent a year and a half and he spent 2 years together with the troops of the Syrian Arab army. We were studying and covering the Syrian conflict. Andrei came there as a journalist, and I came there because spilled our tea. Okay. We got more tea, it's fine. So Andrei went there for his reasons, and I went there because I monitor wars around the world, because I'm a military man, and as they say, a officer is not a job, it's a diagnosis. And this conflict didn't make sense to me. Didn't fit a common pattern. All of wars make logical sense, and this one I couldn't understand. So I went there to understand what it is. I thought I'm going there for a month to check it out, and I spent a year and a half there in the end, for different reasons. Andrei would talk about them later if you want to hear. But definitely wasn't a waste of time. I have learned a lot of very interesting things, and it was eye-opening. So let me introduce the subject. So you guys got a marker? Okay. So this might be a little bit boring, but I think we need to start with a proper introduction. The entirety of military history, all the wars could be separated into two categories according to their goals and the targets. I'm separating this into three categories, and you will see why shortly. So the first category of wars, if we separate by the sides of the conflict, by the goals, and well, let's put goals and methods into the same category to save space, and traits or circumstances. So the first type are classic conventional wars. The sides are one army fighting another conventional army. The attackers are a military force. Their targets are enemy military forces and his economy. his production facilities. The goals of the war are capturing territory, military defeat of the enemy, we don't need to include destroying enemy economy and production facilities, because as long as the territory can be captured, that's not actually a goal. And as far as the methods, that is direct military action. Traits of this war include large masses of soldiers, specific location of each of the fighting sides and their units, and separation of the conflict area into front lines and the rear areas of each of the fighting sides. Initially, most of the wars in history were like that, but later a second type of warfare emerged, the insurgent or guerrilla warfare. Let's view this from the viewpoint of the guerrillas, because from the viewpoint of the army, they're just fighting guerrillas. So the target of the guerrillas are enemy. So the attackers are units of locals or small infiltrating military units who are attacking enemy soldiers, enemy infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, and government and command and control. The goals of this war include making the enemy army unable to function, essentially. The methods include sabotage, ambushes, common. The sabotage warfare is actually a subtype of guerrilla warfare, but in sabotage or commando warfare, it's carried out by special forces as opposed to guerrilla warfare carried out by local population. The traits of this war include increased mobility and camouflage of the combatants, a connection between the guerrillas and local population, and the support of the guerrillas by the local population. So until very recently, all wars in history could be separated into these two categories, as long as we classify them broadly like this. A lot of wars were a mix of the two. So the wars of liberation were insurgencies against colonial governments, against their own governments, against invading armies. But overall, even civil wars could be usually described as a mixture of a classic war and a guerrilla war. So the civil war in Russia, for example, could be described as a proper warfare between red and white armies and guerrilla actions. But watching the warfare in Syria, it didn't fit these two categories, which is why I actually went there to check it out, because it's not obvious from afar. And now there's actually a third type of warfare, terrorist warfare. And it's very different and much worse. The attackers consist of lone wolf terrorists, but in large numbers, and small groups of terrorists, much smaller. And the targets, of course, include all the targets that are included in other wars, but the main target is the civilian population of a country. As I said, that includes also infrastructure, command and control, government and local government, army, law enforcement, etc. But the main target is the civilian population. The goals of this type of warfare are also completely different from the other two types. The goals include creating chaos. Taking ground is not one of the goals. It could be accomplished after chaos is created, but it's not the main goal. And the main goal is destroying the government and destroying the economy, basically dismantling the country. So all of this, like Andrey said, basically destroys the country as a single entity. A country can no longer perform any functions and exist as a state. It stops existing as a single system. So there's no goal of capturing ground. So and this produces a number of traits. I'll separate some space because there's a number of changes there. The mobility and camouflage of terrorists is extremely high. There are no command and control centers in their classic sense that could easily be reached and which could be destroyed to stop the actions of terrorists. A large number of targets, and that's putting it very mildly. Near impossibility of preventing terrorist attacks or defending against them, with classic methods at least, using the army. And it also does not require support of the local population. I will briefly go over these traits of the new type of warfare as quickly as I can. What do I mean by maximum mobility and camouflage? A terrorist is not and cannot be distinguished from a normal civilian before he starts acting. And even after he starts acting, as soon as he throws down the gun, he can again no longer be distinguished from a normal civilian. Moreover, he doesn't even have to have a weapon. Improvised explosives are extremely easy to make. Molotov cocktails are very well known even to kids in Syria. The most primitive equipment and weapons are sufficient. Lack of command and control network and headquarters that could be destroyed to disrupt the terrorist networks. All of the terrorists' command centers are very far away and they're hidden. So the sources of terrorism need to be destroyed. They are abroad, they are hidden, they cannot be targeted. A large number of targets If in conventional warfare the targets are army units and maybe some military factories, and in guerrilla warfare it also includes government institutions, etc., then in the terrorist warfare the number of targets is equal to the number of citizens in the country. An attack can be conducted anywhere, at any time, by any method conceivable. The terrorists cannot be stopped because you can't put a company of soldiers by every house. You cannot fortify every school like a military bunker. The number of targets is so great that there is no conceivable way to protect them all, and no army in the world cannot fight the terrorist threat effectively. Plus, as we have recently seen in Belgium, only 6 terrorists in one day have paralyzed a giant city. 6 lone wolf terrorists. And imagine if their number is in the thousands and they start attacking all at the same time. The consequences are very unfortunate. So, what is the problem for an army fighting the terrorists? In this type of warfare, unlike all others, the army is fighting among friendly civilians. The army cannot use air power, artillery, and other heavy weapons, because if the army starts attacking its own cities with friendly civilians with heavy weapons, it would do the job for the terrorists. So the army would do the terrorist job for them. People often ask me, why is Syrian army moving so slowly in Jobar, in Daraya? Why did it take half a year to clear those areas and then they left and the terrorists moved in again? That's because the army has its hands tied by this factor. It cannot kill 200,000 friendly civilians to wipe out 5,000 terrorists. So that's a huge problem. So the army loses its firepower advantage. And in addition to losing this advantage, it has a number of drawbacks compared to terrorists. Okay, you guys are listening? You're not bored? Okay, you understand everything? I'm trying to describe it very briefly because everybody here has military experience, what the terrorist threats are, so I won't go too deeply into it. So what are the difficulties in counteracting this terrorist tactic? First of all, problems mobilizing the population, drafting soldiers. First of all, psychologically, when you draft a man to a classic war, he goes from his home to the front lines to protect his home. He understands that he will fight the enemy over there, so he doesn't have to fight them over here. But during a terrorist war, a lot of people can't leave their homes because they would leave their families and their homes defenseless, because the enemies are in their hometown, in their area. And most people, the vast majority of them, would not go and leave their homes to fight terrorists somewhere else. Second, it's logistically complex to organize and mobilize people. And because all of the assembly locations are well known, they are announced, you have to announce it to assemble people. So they're well known police stations, military depots, so people come to these locations, get together, they're hit by an IED, they are attacked by gunmen, and therefore you can't assemble civilians to enroll them in the army. And there's a tactical problem. To mobilize people, you have to take them from their homes to an assembly point, to a military unit, and then this military unit moves out. So, to fight terrorists in a town, you have to assemble people from this town, form them into a military unit, and have them come back to fight the terrorists. So, moving these people into the army and moving the army units to the site takes a very long time. And terrorists are extremely mobile. Their time frame is much more limited. If you do not react to them within an hour, then they would have already done the damage and moved on. As far as problems with defending from terrorists is they cannot be detected and they do not need any sort of unobtainable or heavy weapons. They don't need artillery, heavy vehicles, they use Molotov cocktails, light firearms, homemade explosives. Me and Andrei have seen plenty of it in Daraya. In pretty much in every city there's all those underground factories making tons, literal tons of homemade explosives, and they're so trained. They make those shaped charges, basically assembly line production. They make them by the hundreds, and all sorts of IEDs in a week. And they have the procedure well orchestrated already. They chase out some of the useless population when they take over, and part of the population is captured as slaves and used to dig trenches, to put tunnels everywhere, like we've seen in Jobar, connecting all the houses. And part of the population is used in making all those homemade explosions, homemade explosives, and all that. So they don't need a huge number of people, so that some are producing weapons, some are making fortifications, some are fighting, attacking, etc. It's actually the local population who is watched by a couple guards who are actually making all the explosives. Technically, it's fairly well established how to establish those factories. If you have seen their shaped charges, they are very simple and they punch through a T-72 at a decent range. They have made those explosively formed penetrators very well. We have filmed when a BMP-2 was hit from maybe 30-25 yards. Yeah, they had it bolted onto a tree, and a BMP was driving by, and it was command detonated and went right through. Well, at least I was lucky that it went through the engine. Yeah, so the crew at least was okay, but Soviet vehicle went through the engine all the way through, and the BMP still drove out. Can you explain the difference between a guerrilla and a terrorist? A guerrilla attacks the enemy army, the enemy government. Well, those he considers enemies. In the case of civil war, it could be his government, law enforcement, and army, or invading army. A terrorist attacks the civilian population. That is the difference. Why are terrorists much more successful? They do not need heavy weapons. They are mostly attacking non-hardened, unarmed targets. their goal is not to destroy the enemy army. They are only fighting the army when they don't have another option, when they have been cornered somewhere, when they need to show that they are fighting the army. But mostly they are attacking civilians. Or, for example, they can start fighting the army will start shooting back. At the same time, they mass murder civilians, bring Western journalists who film it and say that the army did it. In fact, the terrorist warfare became possible because of globalization, the human rights movements, etc. Because back in the day, in the Middle Ages, if a town got massacred, nobody cared. Now, the terrorist starts acting, they put videos on YouTube, the world reacts, the country gets sanctioned, the country gets isolated, the terrorists gain legitimacy. And one of the examples is how Syria was deprived of its weapons of mass destruction. We actually have sort of betrayed Syria there when we have backed the drive to deprive them of chemical weapons, because we have undermined the morale of Syrian population and the Syrian army, because they have viewed it as insurance against invasion by the foreign players like Saudis and Turks. So it was a sort of it gave them confidence. So what happened? The terrorists captured a number of civilians in Latakia, Alawites. At the time, Vasily was actually filming a tank attack in the area on August 21st, 2013, and the UN Commission actually asked us for the source footage of that attack that we filmed. That would show that they didn't have chemical protective equipment, gas masks and such. Yeah, it wasn't a city in Jobar, it was a suburb of Damascus. Yeah, so it was. I would think that when fighting in a city, a regular army should have chemical protective gear. Sure, I agree, but the question is, do they have it on hand in needed amounts? And you know, in war, yeah, of course you could say that it's a good thing for everybody to wear chemical protection and body armor and all that, but a lot of people here have military experience. Like, even as a journalist, I didn't always wear body armor, because yeah, oftentimes you also have to go through holes in walls, through tunnels, and you can't fit in body armor, so you don't wear it. So, you know, yeah, you could say that it's each soldier should have a gas mask, but you know, urban fighting is also wearing out uniforms and such really quickly. Put on the uniform, 3 or 4 days of running on bricks, and it needs to be changed. So, if they issued gas masks to every battle, then they would be lost or worn out. Plus, and chemical weapons weren't really used before then. So, chemical weapons were used. Journalists, they have showed that people were poisoned, so to speak. It was all over the internet. Vasya was on site in the area, and the soldiers were already panicking that they would get poisoned by it as well. So there's a lot of noise in the mass media, and the UN and the so-called the world decides to deprive Syria of its chemical weapons. So as soon as that happens, the neighbors that are interested in dismantling Syria start sending more and more terrorists and openly talking about intervening. If before then it was concealed and we had to find bread that was brought from Turkey to supply rebels, and we had to show that this was shipped from Turkey, after that it was done completely openly because nobody was afraid of Assad anymore, and they knew that all they need to do is wear out the army. Yes, so terrorists do infiltrate the country, but you know, a mass terrorist attack is only possible once you have enough terrorists in country. Free terrorists cannot paralyze a country, so they need to gradually infiltrate enough in there. Here, they are also getting in, waiting for the right moment. In fact, according to some estimates, let's say it's my estimates, okay, let's not say whose estimates those are. Now we have more potential terrorists in country than Syria had when they were attacked. It's not starting not because there are few terrorists here, but because the moment isn't right yet. They didn't get the order yet. As soon as their bosses decide that this is a good time, the terrorist war will start here. No. The question is that, you know, what Andrey was talking about. It's not about preventing terrorism. It's that WMDs were preventing military invasions. WMDs can only prevent conventional warfare. They cannot destroy terrorists. You can't use it against your own cities. Some people have told me that we aren't afraid of terrorists because we have nuclear weapons. What are we going to use it against? Moscow? St. Petersburg? To destroy a few thousand terrorists, we will need to wipe out several million population? It's insanity. So, WMDs can only prevent regular invasions. And yes, right now, Syria and its neighbors, after it's been deprived of its WMDs, the Saudis are talking about invading. Turks have openly moved in across the border. Before then, they didn't even talk about it. So, Syria, by losing its WMDs, has lost its status as a player. The negotiations about Syria are happening without asking Syria anymore. Only because Syria is still supported by Russia, Iran, and China, it's still considered a state. If we said that we are not back in Syria, and well, Iran would not back out because as soon as Syria falls, then Sunnis will attack Iran. So they have to back Syria. But if Syria did not have outside backing, it would simply be invaded and dismantled. Yeah, ask the questions. No, you don't need pre-made explosives. Yeah, you can make them from household items. You don't need any sort of military explosives. You can manufacture them in industrial quantities using household ingredients. Okay, Andrey, don't give recipes, okay? Yeah, not on YouTube. They make IEDs using the most basic materials. They make... Yes, of course. Homemade explosives are not quite as good per pound as the military stuff, of course. But they can make it in any amount required. No, 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 even shape charges. I mean, we've showed those there stuff. If you need to know how to make a shape charge at home, talk to me, give me your ID, your fingerprints, I will relay them to authorities. Kidding, of course. Trust me, it's completely possible. It's not a problem whatsoever. Yeah, go to my YouTube channel, look at the Spena video where we looked at the explosives plant in the town of Spena. As soon as that was taken over, terrorists had to leave a number of cities because they lost their explosives supply. Unfortunately, we lost a number of movies when our YouTube channel was blocked, but on my live journal we have a number of movies that we managed to recover, and Andrey's YouTube channel also has a number of movies. So watch them, we talk about those questions. Yeah, we have them in Spena, and we have a movie with explosive ordnance disposal. We have footage of their hideouts and their fortifications, and we showed as much as we could because we're foreign citizens in Syria after all. So even if they showed us quite a bit of stuff, they didn't let us show all of it on YouTube. You know, it's war after all. We showed as much as we could, and trust me, it's quite a lot. Yeah, remember that explosive ordnance guys? Yeah, they showed terrorists make huge amounts of those IEDs and make them almost as good as military. They are trained by Saudi instructors, who are trained by American instructors. They are trained on site in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia. They are trained extremely well by top specialists. What do you mean? Are they helping terrorists? They are the guys who are attacking Syria. They are the main players. So the main goal of this war is destroying the country. So Syria gets Turkey gets northern Syria, which was historically part of it. As far as religion, it's mostly a tool. It's not really a religious war at the highest level. It was created and fanned by outside players. Of course, it's the main excuse. It's the main ideology. But the goal is to destroy the country. Have you seen my lecture with a map of the Middle Eastern safety chain, or the Middle Eastern safety belt, how it was destroyed? These countries, Libya, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, those were called the Middle Eastern safety belt, or the Arab safety belt. So that chain was destroyed, link by link. Syria is a key element in the chain. It's the only secular state remaining in the Middle East right now. It's the only democratic state in the Middle East, the only one. It's the only stable and economically developed state. It existed mostly by virtue of its own industry. It didn't exist through oil sales. It was the main producer of foodstuffs in the entire Middle East. Even now, it's selling food to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, etc. So, of course, everybody on the ground knows this very well. So we all know how this works. Everybody knows that Saudis, Turks are behind this. So why aren't the same tactics used against them? a lot of these countries are very authoritarian. So to attack a country like that, you need to move in a lot of foreign terrorists into it. In Iran, such terror warfare would not work right now, because they see you're a Salafi, cut off your head, you're done. Yeah, because it's not a secular state, it's a theocracy, of course. It's very authoritarian, to say the least. Saudi Arabia is even worse. Wahhabism is the official religion there, so you can't do very much by sending Wahhabis there. So it's such methods can mostly be used to attack secular states that afford their citizens a large measure of freedom. What prevented the Syrian army from stopping the influx of terrorists? Humanism, tolerance. And after the war started, then, as I have said, the army did not have enough soldiers to guard everything, to stop terrorists. Yeah, yes, I understand your question about stopping the influx of terrorists. So, they did not have enough soldiers to do anything. You know how long Syrian borders are? Not... No, that's not... Yeah, there's Iraq there, yes. Yeah, but that was one of the main sources of terrorists, actually. So, ISIS went through there, for example. So, you know, all of the borders of Syria were a source of terrorists. And to secure every border, they needed to send all the soldiers to the border. And then the country would be taken over by terrorists. The country cannot support an army large enough to secure all the borders. As soon as they take some soldiers and send them somewhere, the terrorists take over the place that the soldiers just left. Do you think that, for example, the Russian army can block all the borders? We have no capability to guard the entire border. If we take the entire army and deploy it on the border, we cannot block it, because the borders are extremely long. And after the terrorists start attacking, we have even fewer forces. Of course, this is a new type of warfare, and Syria is a proving ground for this type of warfare and for counteracting this type of warfare. So, both sides are testing their methods. What can you say about that? I understood your question, and this is the next thing we'll be moving on to. Well, okay, let's not go into details on this subject, on the previous subject, so let's move to counterterrorism. Studying this war, I didn't figure this out right away, but in about half a year, I understood and started asking the same question that you asked, and what I saw is that the success and failure of terrorists in areas of Syria and the areas that were still controlled by the secular government were the same as the areas that had citizens' militia. The exact same. The towns and areas, or even blocks and districts that had, at the time of the terrorist invasion, citizens' militia units already formed, those areas were either not taken over by terrorists and not disrupted by terrorists, or the terrorists were quickly eradicated in those areas. Fairly soon, terrorists even stopped attacking areas that have citizens militia because they take losses and don't achieve much. Why is that? When I came here and started talking about citizens militia, it was very hard for me to communicate this to officials. They all dislike the word militia because, as I later understood, that most people misunderstand, including even military officials, they misunderstand what citizens militia is. They think of it as a disorganized mob with guns just running around, not controlled by anybody, not communicating with anybody. So, in Syria, when the war was starting, they didn't start organizing citizens militia right away, and in some areas they couldn't organize it before the terrorists moved in. But they had an sort of a ROTC organization that was forming civilian militia units. Right now it's called National Defense Force. And those National Defense Force units basically define whether the terrorists are successful or not. Oftentimes, those national defense units are not particularly heavily armed or good at combat. Oftentimes, their main goal is to inform law enforcement and military about where the terrorists are and what they're doing, and then they're destroyed. Sometimes national defense forces blockade the terrorists, preventing them from moving, and sometimes attack the terrorists together with the army. But another problem was that apart from national defense force units, a lot of places that didn't have those also created non-government militias, local militias. And those self-organized, uncontrolled militia units were either useless or oftentimes even harmful. And that was a big problem because, that's the same thing people are afraid of here. When I started talking to the government officials here, they also don't understand this, because militia operating without contact with the government is at best useless, because militia doesn't have the firepower of the army, and well, in terms of communicating militarily, it's not so important, because the militia actually has more intelligence as to what is happening locally compared to the army units. As far as operating together with the military, it's not important because their main goal is simply to guard their homes. Their only job is to protect their area where they live in. And that's their strength, because they're always on site. They are there before the terrorists arrive. They know it. The army still has to react. The army has to move in, and the army needs to know what's happening. The militia already know what's happening, and they are already there. So the independent or self-organized militia units, the army cannot distinguish militia units from terrorists if they don't have a common communication through the government. And for a tank man who's inside a tank, a militiaman and a terrorist, they're one and the same thing. Some guy on a forum was recently telling me that, as soon as terrorists start attacking and the army moves in, I would get out with my hunting rifle and we will help our army tanks. I tried to explain to him that if he shows up with a rifle in an area of military operation, he will be the first target. And he would say that, not everybody is an idiot like you. I will wave to the tankers, tell them I'm a good guy. So, stupidity. So that's the first problem. A second problem, it's equally bad, is that all of these local militia units quickly morph into gangs. They need money to pay the fighters, full-time fighters. They need weapons. They need to obtain food. So they start acting like the terrorists. Not just looking like them, but acting just the same. So all of the uncontrolled militias are generally viewed as enemies by other factions. So when we were in Syria, we actually watched TV quite a bit, or checked reports on the internet. So oftentimes these uncontrolled militias are painted as if they are Free Syrian Army. So most of the units that are called Free Syrian Army in the Western media are actually local militia gangs. They're usually not even against the government. They are simply for being independent gangs and doing what they will in their area. They're simply against anybody trying to control them. Sometimes they deal with the terrorists. They agree with them that the terrorists don't attack them and they don't attack terrorists. And an army unit comes up, they agree that they let them through, so they're just holding their small area. But this does not solve the problem. So I'm always trying to communicate with various officials and trying to get them to understand this. Unfortunately, usually they tell me, thank you for your call, your input is very important to us, thank you, bye. And that's about as far as it goes most times. So now we've sort of moved away from trying to reach the top levels of government and now working through other structures. Have you tied this in with today's conference on color revolutions? Color revolutions are, they're different and people pay too much attention to them. Color revolutions only happen when the government allows it to happen, when it's weak. When a government is strong, a coup is not possible. Law enforcement has plenty of ways to prevent a coup as long as the government has the political will. And when the government pays too much attention to coups, it loses sight of more grave threats. If there is a coup here, it would only be a cover for a real attack that would dismantle the country. Okay, so what's a coup? One bag of rich people take the power from another group of rich people. The country stays the same. The figureheads change. So what? In Ukraine, for example, if not for the resistance in the east, it would be the same as the first one. What they call that? Their revolution of dignity or something. Nothing changed. Yanukovych would be changed for his former economy minister. So what? Yeah, nobody cares. But the goal of a terrorist operation is to destroy and dismantle the country as an entity so that it would cease existing. Why are Americans supporting the Kurds now? And now the Syrian army is all of a sudden fighting Kurds, when they spent the entire previous war fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Syrian Arab army units. They are attempting to use Kurds as another player that would dismantle Syria and increase chaos. That is the goal. No, we haven't talked to Kurdish military and political leaders. We have talked to Kurdish fighters. I'm not a diplomat to talk to leadership. No, they're not in the frontline trenches with the fighters. No, we were hanging out with the tanks, you know, putting cameras in the foxholes. No, the top military political leadership aren't usually there. No, they're not there.
Вот. И здесь что тут? Ну и ладно.
Okay, that's fine.
Бумажка, дальше можно читать. Так вот. И здесь возникает вопрос.
So, the next question is, what can be done if we understand that a threat exists? And people often ask me, are you sure that there will be a terrorist invasion? How can I be sure? It will happen if the terrorist leadership decides it should happen. I'm not one of the terrorist leadership, I don't know. But I know that the threat exists, and a threat should be considered substantial unless we know that we can counter it. And as of right now, we cannot, obviously. So then we have a question of what to do. And now let's have a pause, drink some water, 10 minutes or so, right? Hold on, don't all run away yet. The second part will talk about what to do. It will only be interesting to those who understand what the threat is and that it's a real threat. If some people think that that I'm simply paranoid, that nothing like that is happening, then thank you for your time and yeah. Thank you. Okay, so only those who consider this threat to be real should stay.